Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, thank you guys so much for the support as we hit 4 years now of this show. It's unbelievable, and I'm so glad that y'all are still sticking with us and getting value out of this. And as I mentioned with my guests before we start recording, one of the things that I get asked a lot of questions about, and I always appreciate when you guys ask me questions about topics, is about practice and practice planning. It's definitely something that I can tell for you as listeners is something that's really on your mind, is something that maybe as a kind of a community we're very conscientious about, is making the most of the time that we have with our players, making sure that our practices are meaningful, that they're purposeful, and that we're getting everything that we possibly can out of practice. And so that's going to be our topic today, about making every practice count, talking about the way to kind of structure practices, the way practices kind of flow throughout the season, the balance between teamwork and individual work, and obviously other stuff, as I always get into with my guests. So settle in. We're going to get into some practice and practice planning, and this is going to be something great that I think you guys as listeners are going to get a lot out of as you start to think about your practices, not just for the summer, but also for the season that's upcoming. So let's jump into it right now with my guest, who very excitedly just took on a new position at Crean Lutheran. Very happy to be joined by a veteran coach. Coach Kyle Rouse is joining us today. Coach, again, appreciate you being able to come on and talk to us today. Congratulations again. How are you doing?
No, appreciate you. And yeah, I love the show. You're doing a great job. 4 years is crazy, so good for you. But it's just great to have real platforms where coaches can learn and just feel like, there's a place to go. So appreciate it. But no, doing great. Happy to be on. And hopefully, there's some little nuggets that somebody can get from this. And if not, it's all good too.
Well, you know what? I know I will. I always get something out of every guest. I know our listeners will, but if anything, I'm going to get something out of it because I'm always taking notes and I'm always learning. So I promise you, we'll definitely be learning from this, Coach. Let's start with you and your journey, your basketball journey, your coaching journey. I know you have a lot of experience on your belt. So talk to us about the path that the game of basketball took you to ultimately lead you to Crean Lutheran.
So, I mean, obviously, passion, basketball was always a passion. But it's I've had to tell this story a couple times recently, changing jobs, but it was honestly middle school. I mean, I was very fortunate, had amazing high school coaches, and it was a connection that I made early on, with the youth camps in the community. So I got to know a couple really quality coaches when I was in fourth, fifth, sixth grade. And it was literally seventh grade. I remember it like it was, even though it was 20 plus years ago, but remember like it was yesterday. It was one of those same projects that everybody does. What do you want to do when you grow up type of thing, like actually write about it. And I said, I really want to coach and teach. That's what I want to do. Like, not, and I know some people say play in the NBA and do these things. No, I want to coach and teach. And it started there. And fortunately, I had great mentorship through those same coaches. I was at Murrieta Valley High School, Southern California, and just was blessed with great mentorship there. And they allowed me to really start coaching at a young age. I started coaching at 16. I don't count that in my years, so to speak, but I started coaching at 16. My head coach wanted me to lead up the 7th and 8th grade feeder system that we had and just make sure that they understood what Murrieta Valley basketball was about, how to run our motion offense, just the basics. And that was that was 1998, I think, something like that, in the 90s.
Who's counting?
Yeah. So, and it was then that it made sense. And it started to become more than just a passion. It started to become almost my why. We talk a lot about our why in our programs, and not just why we coach, but also why do we do this drill? Why do we do, those things? The why is key. But so, yeah, luckily I ended up doing that. I had a chance to potentially play after my senior year there. But I actually turned that down to coach because the same coach that I had offered me a position to lead the freshman team as the head coach, literally at 18 years old,
Wow.
and took it and ran with it. Haven't missed a season since. Been coaching since that season. So I owe a lot to him and just kind of putting me on the path to hopefully being a lifelong coach, to be honest with you. I mean, it's a great field to be in. I feel like I don't work a day in my life, you know.
Yeah, it's a lot of hours, but sometimes it's just crazy how it just doesn't feel like work, right? When you're doing something that you love like that much and you're so passionate about it, time flies by and it's like, yeah, it's working, but like,
Right.
where'd the time go? So, um, I wanted to ask you about, since you just went through this process of taking a new position, and I thought that this would be really topical since it's probably fresh on your mind. A lot of coaches right now, or might be in the position of transitioning between jobs, looking for a new opportunity, maybe looking for a new coaching position or a new gig, kind of like in the situation that you were in. And since you just went through the interview process, knowing that every interview is different and every person who's interviewing you or group who's interviewing is different, I wanted to ask you about any general advice that you would give maybe to a coach who's listening who might be entering that interview process soon or interviewing for a job, about what they can do to be the best they can be in that interview.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, authenticity is key. I
Hmm.
know it sounds so simple, but be authentically yourself because one, I feel like most of the time people can see through fake. You know, if they know if you know what you're talking about or not. But being yourself is ultimately what's going to get the job that you want. You know, maybe not the job you think you want, but the job that you're supposed to be in. And that's kind of what this process has been like. I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
know where I was going to land, but I knew
Hmm.
that the right place was going to be there, and somebody would see my authentic self and be like, "Yeah, we definitely want him running our
Right.
program." So I think that's number one. But two, just I feel like people want to over talk in these things and try and sell every aspect of what they do.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, your resume does that. You know what I mean? I think the real key is being able to sell three things that you're really good at and that you brought to maybe programs you've been at, and that's what you want to bring to whatever such and such program you're trying to apply for, and bringing those in and being specific,
Yeah.
um, and just tie it into what they're looking for as a school. I think a lot of times, and I was fortunate, my mom was in human resources, so she did a lot of interviews. That was her job. And she taught me your job is to still research before you even get the job. I mean, you should be
Hmm.
researching whatever that role is before you even get an interview, just in case you get one. And that's something I've done at every interview. Like, I want to know what the core values are of this institution. I
Yeah.
want to know what the coaches have done prior to me getting there, how they've been successful or not successful, what their mission is in the athletic department. I mean, you should know all those things because you can tie those into those interviews and they know you did your homework, and I feel like that goes a long way as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely that idea of, you could definitely tell in an interview, and I've been on interview panels before. When I've interviewed for coaches and been in those discussions, you can tell right away the coaches that you're interviewing who did their research and tailor their answers and really want to be at like the particular school they're interviewing for, versus somebody who kind of gives that like boilerplate, like, okay, this is kind of your answer that maybe sounds good, but it's also an answer that you would probably give to every single school
Yeah,
that you interview for, and you didn't. It's not really necessarily lines up to us in any sort of unique way.
right. No, for sure. And it just shows what you're really putting a priority on, what's your
Hmm.
priority to for the reason, I guess, of wanting this position. But and a lot of
Yeah.
times they could care less about your wins and losses. I mean, a lot of these schools, depending on where you're going, I mean, if their primary objective is academics, which most are, I mean, you
Yeah.
better be able to speak on that. That's great. You can talk your way through a practice, or this is what we run, this is how I coach. That's great. But are you going to lead, people to graduation? Are you going to have a great team GPA?
Hmm.
Those things are more important to a lot of people that are actually interviewing you.
Yeah, I know I've heard of it and I know it definitely happens, but I have never in a job interview been asked about like my X's and O's or
Right.
practice plans. I know it's out there. I know it happens, but for me, it's always
Right.
been like culture building or how do you deal with conflict or parents or bringing people
Yep.
together and stuff like that. It's all the stuff that like isn't necessarily X's and O's related because they want to make sure that it's the right person representing that program, representing the program and building up the program and not just the basketball side sort of thing.
Sure.
So no, I agree. Um all right, coach, as we kind of transition to thinking about this topic of making every practice count, I wanted to start kind of big picture as you kind of think about the idea of where you want your practices to sort of look like in the beginning,
Mhm.
to the middle of the season, and then towards the end of the season. When you kind of map out your goals for kind of each section of the season, what are some of those goals about what you want to accomplish in each of those kind of trimesters of the season,
Yeah.
so to speak?
No, and honestly, the way you just said it is a great way, and what coaches should you should look at it that way. It should be broken down. It shouldn't be the same thing every day. Shouldn't be the same thing throughout the season. I mean, one way that we like to do that. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people do the same thing, but
Mhm.
I I I don't know if I can go back to 98, but I can definitely go back to like maybe 2003, and I have every practice still
Wow.
that I've wrote, just because
Yeah.
I think it's sometimes to go forward, you got to look back occasionally, not all the time, but like where were you, what did you plan 2 years ago? Maybe you had a great team 2 years ago. What did those plans look like? You know, this part of the season, this part of the season. We do a lot of that. I'm not looking that far back, but I mean, we do a lot of that before we even start planning our practices for the season.
Mhm.
Look at, the biggest thing is your goals, right? What are you trying to hit with the team that you have? And then you need to tailor the practices around that. So, I mean, the first couple weeks for us in the as you called it, the trimester, so to speak, the first time, it's a lot of foundational repetition on things that we pride ourselves in, whether that's, as simple as, man-to-man defense. We're going to hit all the, or how we, if we force them baseline or if we're forcing them, all those things. Like we want to make sure that if those are priority for us, we hit those right off the bat and we hit them hard. Because that's when you really, I mean, that's when you have the most time. You're not worried about opponent scouts. You're not worried about scout team and scout
Yeah.
plays.
It's,
The
it's
most
your
time you
time. Yeah.
have, yeah. I mean, the most time you have is that October, September, October, whatever, whoever gets what. I know obviously every division is different and high school is different than all college
Mhm.
divisions, but whatever time you get, I think that's when you really want to hit those important points. So we do a lot of skill development. We do a lot of like postcard split stuff in the beginning. We do a lot of, we honestly don't even teach offenses yet. We do a lot of concepts.
Concepts. Yeah.
And then by the time when you're ready to introduce certain things, you've already hit all the concepts. So the offenses are easy, especially when you keep things consistent. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, that first trimester, as you said, is really about that, hitting the foundational keys to what you're valuing in your program. And, obviously each coach is different. For me,
Yeah.
defense is number one. Like if you can't defend, you don't want to play for me. But so that's a big, that's a big part of what we do those first couple of weeks. Offense is fine, like we, coaching at the college level, we recruited you. We've seen a ton of tape. We've watched you in person. We know you can shoot. We know you can play offense. Can you do all these other little details though? So that's what we do a lot in that first trimester because we want them to also understand what we're about. Like, what is our program about? And, they should be able to understand what that is after the first week of practice, 2 weeks of practice. But yeah, it's a lot of that. And we compete every day. I mean, that was something I was going to bring. I know it was on one of
Mhm.
the other questions
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. About
You
competing.
should,
Sure.
you should have a competition in every drill that you do. I mean, and it's doable. You just got to be creative in some. I mean, obviously, yeah, you know how to compete in a shooting drill, right? Who makes the shots first, but to me, you can compete in every single drill you do. It can be the shell drill. It can be a box out drill. It can be anything. You can figure out a way how to score it and you can figure out a way how to compete with it. And that's something that's key. And we start that from week one. Our practice plan week one already has teams separated, not by like A team, B team, C team. It's by matchups. Like we want
Mhm.
everybody to play with each other. Like especially again in
Yeah.
that month, we're not scouting anybody. We're not playing a game. So those are the times to really put groups together that maybe you wouldn't think you're going to put together. But it's good for everybody to play against each other. It's good for everybody to play with different people because you never know when those opportunities are going to come. Foul trouble, injuries. All of a sudden, somebody on this group is now playing somebody on this group.
Yeah, that perfect group you have at the beginning, it never will end that way. It's always something's always going to change that group. They're always going to get mixed up. Yeah.
And it always gets it gets the other groups better too.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Yeah.
so that now to me, that first, like you said, trimester is key to just really hit on, and we put this in our program handbook before we start the season, but just those core values. What is important to our program? What's important to our staff? And really, what's our identity? The identity of our program is ABCD. Well, you better be hitting ABCD the first 2 weeks hard, otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah. And as a coach, I think that's one of the most important places to start is to make sure that you as a coach have thought about what your identity is. What do you value? Like what are the things that matter to you? Because that, at least it sounds like for you, that's kind of like your guide to everything. It all starts from knowing what your values are and the things that are important to you, because then you can build, your practices off of that. And so I think for any coach who's listening who maybe doesn't quite have that solidified down, that's the place to start, is to really do that reflection on what matters to you as a coach. And then you can kind of build a plan off of that.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like writing a paper or a book. I mean, if you don't have an introduction or a thesis or whatever you're calling it, how are you going to write the rest of the paper? How are you going to do that? How are you going to, if you don't know what you're about and your identity, as I said, how are you going to write a practice plan in the middle of the season if you're still not really sure where we want to be? You need to know where you want to be. The whole team doesn't need to know, but you as a coaching staff should know what you should want to accomplish by every point of that season. And we actually do that too. So you talked about the trimesters. We break it down a little differently, but it's similar. So we break it down in phases. So phase 1 is kind of what we talked about when you're practicing in September and so forth and like that. Phase 2 is when you get into non-conference season and it's like November and such. Phase 3 is conference play. And then phase 4 is postseason if you get there. So we tell them that ahead of time. But as a coaching staff, before we even start in September, we do our coaches meetings and get together on what our goals are for the season. But we talk about, hey, by phase 2, we better be able to do this, and this. If we're not doing that, we're behind, and this is based off of, we keep a ton of stats and we keep, as I mentioned, all of our plans from the year before and the year before. So you can go off of, hey, this team did a really good job being consistent that year. Here's where we were at phase 2. You can start gauging that moving forward. Because if this team is now behind at phase 2, okay, what did we miss? What are we missing? And then you can start looking inward, because I feel like coaches lose track of that along the way, especially when games start, because you start worrying about other things, which is rightly so. But
there's a lot more. Things, it can get very overwhelming, right? You can lose track of stuff and you start thinking about all the other things, games that happen, things that are coming on. So like for you to have something to go back to, it's kind of like something that can kind of ground you a bit. It almost sounds like.
Yeah, and it's almost it's an ability. It gives you the ability to not reset, but almost, okay, this is great. We're in the space we wanted to be. It may not feel like it, but we're exactly where we're supposed to be. We're hitting the right points. But again, that's all about, like you mentioned and we talked about earlier, is hitting those right things in those first 2 to 4 weeks. Because if you hit the wrong things, then at week 8 and week 12, you're still backtracking. And all that does is lose yourself time. And as you said, you feel like you don't have enough time as it is with your players. So imagine if you're still backtracking because you didn't hit the foundational concepts in the first 4 weeks, and then you got to go back to it, in week 10.
It's that idea, I think, Coach, and I completely agree, of like you want to. It's kind of almost like if you try to speed things up, you try to go further, like all right, we got this down. Let's just keep moving, keep moving. You end up losing a lot more time because you're going to keep having to go back. It's worth, really hammering that stuff in the beginning. I think of it like as a teacher, almost like classroom management stuff. You get that done those first few weeks and you feel like you're losing all this instructional time, but then you get all that time back because you've laid that down in. I think it's the same thing with practice planning.
Oh, I agree. That's a great way to put it. And to me, we're teachers anyway. It's just our classroom is the court. So, I mean, but that's a great way to put it. It's exactly right.
Yeah. So when those foundational pieces are in, now we're thinking about the middle of the season. So teams have been scouting you, you're doing scout, seasonal records are going to be what they are, depending on what the year is
Sure.
like. But when you think of kind of in general, as you hit the middle of your season, how do your practices kind of change as you kind of move into that, second trimester, so to speak?
Right. I mean, we try and still keep the first half hour the same every day. And by same, I don't mean the exact same drills. I just mean the same flow. So
Okay.
we may do, because we do fundamentals every day. I mean, that's, to me, that's still sometimes a lost art when I go see practices. It's like you're doing all this quote exceptional stuff, but we don't know how to jump stop. We don't know how to, there's these things that they don't know how to do. So, I mean, we still hit fundamentals every day. And again, it may not be the same thing. And then we love doing some kind of, again, individual spot breakdown, whether sometimes it's only 5 minutes, sometimes it's 10, but we don't normally go past 12, just to keep that first half hour. So we always keep that the same. I mean, because again, it gives them the same, it gives them consistency. It gives us that first 30 minutes to really use breakdown drills to help us emphasize what we're about to hit the last, hour and a half of practice, the meat of the
Hmm.
practice, so to speak. But then after that, it's really whether it's a game week or whether we're prepping for somebody, or maybe we have a game at the end of the week and we have 4 practices to quote prep for it. What we'll do usually is I don't like to bombard players with the scout stuff too early, but what we do is we incorporate certain concepts that maybe this team is going to bring in, and we'll do that. We'll compete with that, maybe with small
Yeah.
side games, or
Well, yeah. Hmm.
we do a lot of 3-on-3, 4-on-4 breakdown, where let's say this team is, I don't know, they love running a ton of flare screen action, or they like doing this. So we won't even bring up personnel. We won't bring up, oh, this is what so and so runs. We'll just say, hey, we're going live and we're breaking it down this way. Offense, you're running a flare screen continuity action, and then we're guarding it. And then we'll just talk about how to guard it. And we're still competing. Same thing, same way we did in week 1, 2, 3, 4. The teams may be different at this point, but we still compete, and you figure out different ways of scoring it. And then, mainly just fine tuning a lot of those other small details that we've talked about in those first 4 weeks, still in the middle, but making sure that we're still staying true to what we're trying to do. So we're just big on small details. So any drill, I mean, they know what the expectation is. And, we call them out quickly, fix it, and then go on. I'm sure we'll talk about this later too, but
Hmm.
coaches need, and I sometimes I definitely fall to this too, can't talk so much. I mean, you talked about it
It's yeah.
before. We run out of time. I mean, if you
Yeah.
want a talker in practice, you're going to run out of time and run, like you said earlier, wonder where all that time went
Yep.
practices. So you got to be very deliberate with what you're saying, and it needs to be fixed quickly. But middle of the season is mainly that, if we're not scouting and prepping for a team, it's really just working on our stuff. I mean, and again, it's brief. I don't like segments of practice to really go longer than 12 minutes. I feel like you
Yeah.
going 15 and 20-minute segments, you lost them at minute 10. I mean,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah. I've been using for a long time, using, the timer, using the clock, putting X minutes on the clock, and when the timer's off, we're done.
Yep.
Even if I want to do more, nope, we got to move on. I can't.
And you can always come back to it the next
Yeah.
day.
Yes, yes.
There's stuff that we've done too where it's like, man, I really wanted to hit this, and we always deliberate as coaches after practice because it's fresh. So I don't know what other coaches do, but I think
Hmm.
it's smart to plan the next day's practice right after you finish the current day's practice, because I mean, we all have lives. I have 2 girls and a family, and other coaches have stuff to do. By the time you sit down at it again, you may forget the exact thing you thought about after practice was over, that, oh, we need to hit this tomorrow because we didn't quite get it today. So something we do is, to your point, if you didn't get to it, usually we add that as the first drill of the next day's practice, so that we don't miss it. It's still fresh in the players' minds, and you can still get right after it. But to your point, exactly that. You gotta have a
Yeah.
time, in my opinion. Otherwise, you could sit there doing a drill that may not even be relevant for longer than you even want to.
And you're just trying to beat it into them. And next thing you know, you've
Yeah.
spent 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and they're not even getting it. They're not even doing it well still. And then your mood goes down and no one's in a good mood anymore. And it's like,
Well,
oh,
and
there goes that practice.
and they feel like they failed. So then, like you said, the next drill is even harder to pick them back up. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. You could lose a whole practice with something like that, trying to go from there. Yeah. Okay.
on the second
Oh, go.
point, I'm sorry to
No,
interrupt.
no, no. Absolutely. Go
You
ahead.
made a great point. Like that's another thing that I feel like coaches need to be good at is knowing when a drill is just not right. I mean, I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of creating your own drills because there's a lot of drills that are great, but guess what? That drill's great for that particular program because they run such and such. But that doesn't mean the flow and foundation of that drill can't be used in our drill or in our
Hmm.
so anyways, my point bringing that up is it's okay to tell your players, you know what? I created this drill. I don't like it. We're moving on. Like, I feel like even in this, like more so in this generation, they like to know that you're also failing as well. You know, it's okay as a coach to be like, I set this drill up and you know what? It's not fitting what I wanted it to do. I don't like it. We're going to move on and try something different. I think that's something that coaches struggle. I know I used to because you feel like it's perfect. Um,
Yeah.
but it's okay to be like, yeah, this drill's terrible. I mean, it doesn't look exactly how I wanted it, and it's not even relevant to what we're trying to accomplish. And again, to your point, that's why I wanted to bring it up. It
Hmm.
eliminates them failing at it potentially. It eliminates you getting frustrated, and you can literally move on and maybe tweak it later when you have time with your coaching staff. But otherwise, you just throw it out. I guess that's the point. It's okay to throw out drills that you think you should be using. It's okay. You know,
Yeah, yeah, no, I know, I agree, and definitely that the maybe the concept of what that drill is supposed to do is maybe a good concept, but the drill itself either doesn't click with the players or it just doesn't flow the way that you want, and just saying, like it's not working. It's nobody's fault in particular that it doesn't work, and that's I think something for me that I've also had to learn is like if a drill doesn't work that I think should work, like understanding that maybe just the drill, like you said, just isn't good versus like y'all are messing up this
players are
drill. This shouldn't be
terrible.
hard, sort of thing. But
Yeah,
no, it's just, the drill just isn't good, right? And it's just like, all
yeah,
right, well, just scrap it and we'll move on to something else.
agreed. No, definitely agree with that.
So, end of the season, knowing that every season's going to end on a different note, depending on what level of success the team is having, kind of where your program is at and your team is at the end of the season. It's going to look a little bit different, but if you think about traditionally where your programs have been at the end of the season, how does your practice plan change, and in what ways does it also stay the same?
I mean, one blatant one right off the bat is just the time. We spend not near as much time in the gym. Like their bodies are at that point. We've been fortunate. We've been in the postseason, every year the last 5 years, and even before that with our high school teams, we were always in the postseason. But they're done. I mean, it's their bodies are
Yeah.
definitely, and you may be dealing with injuries on your team. But anyway, that's usually one area that we always do. We've always done it at least a half hour less. So if we were practicing for 2 hours all season, sometimes we would get, and I know every school is going to be different, but sometimes we get 2.5 blocks. But if
Mhm.
it's two, usually we're at an hour and a half at the end of the season. And but again, some coaches might be like hour and a half, but here's the deal though. If you can organize your time the right way, you can get just as much out of an hour and a half as you can in a 2 hour block if you're just organized and structured. That's it. I mean, and by that point, going back to what we talked about earlier, if you built the right foundation in the first 4 weeks, all you need is an hour and a half because
Mhm.
they're already so well prepared on what we've done for the last 3 months, 3.5 months, that an hour and a half is plenty. So that's definitely one area. Two, we cut our segments down. That's another thing. Because we still want to compete, right? That's still always our goal, like especially our practices. We're going to compete. We're going to run up and down, with our transition drills, whatever. But we cut the segments down. So like when we play, sometimes we'll do like 11-man drill, or we'll do, similar drills that all these, I'm sure every coach runs, but like the 5-on-4, 4-on-3,
Yep.
3-on-1. So in that we compete. In the beginning of the season, we're going like 4-minute segments, like again, partially to condition them, but two, like we want to get up and down. At the end of the season, that segment is a minute and a half. we might do it twice, but it's a minute
Mm-hmm.
and a half. You're going for a minute and a half, break, we shoot free throws because we always shoot free throws while we're tired, and then we come right back and do it again. So that's a big one. And I feel like at the end of the season, going back off what we were saying, there's no reason to keep trying to drill something that's not going to work that day. So, I mean,
No.
Number one, cut it if it's not working. Two, just be very deliberate, even more so in your practice plans than you were in October. I mean, because you can get exactly the same amount of work done, in my opinion, in um, in 90 minutes as you can in 120 minutes. I mean, you really can't. You just have to be productive, and you can't waste time. Everything has to have a purpose, as you mentioned earlier. Like the purposeful practice can be done. Um, but that's really the two areas, the big areas. Everything else stays pretty much the same as far as like, we have our certain drills that we want to hit. As I said, we stat everything. So, I mean, if we are struggling in a certain category, obviously we'll hit more of that at that point of the season, or, coming into playoffs, if we know this is what it's looking like, and we really want to make sure we're, doing a better job on second shot opportunities or, whatever that is, we'll make sure that that's a priority. But really, it just falls into the same practice plan that we've done all season. Because to me, sometimes I think, and again, I'm a victim of this too, but sometimes I feel like coaches, when you get to that point of the season, especially if you are on the bubble or you're about to make the postseason, or
Mm-hmm.
coaches feel like you got to change something now. You feel like, oh shoot, like we're postseason, like we should do this, and that. If it's been,
Yeah.
you don't need to change. Like maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
add some different things here and there. I'm not saying don't change any or add something, but because obviously I've done that where I add a specific little trap that I might want to use in the playoffs that, conference teams haven't seen. Of course, we do that, but there's no reason to change your flow and what you've been doing for the last 4 months.
No, I think that's something that will get your team rattled. I think when they were like, wait a minute, why are things changing? Like, why is this all of a sudden a bigger deal? I feel like that's kind of when the nerves creep in or people start worrying. It's like, wait a minute, why is this
Yeah,
completely
why is
different?
coach
And
changing everything? Does he not believe that does he believe we need to do this to win?
yeah, yeah. Or is like, is like the stuff we've been doing before not working at all? Like, is it not good enough now? Like, why, if it is, why were we doing it all the way then? Why are we doing all this different stuff? Like, like there's a reason why whatever it is that you did got you to that point, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
just stay consistent. And and if something's not working, okay, then maybe look at that. But the other thing that we do, and I'll give my, assistants a lot of credit, is,
Hmm.
actually we took this from Cleveland State, but at the WBCA convention last year, but having fun still. I mean, if you're not giving them some moments of fun in February, late February, early March, I mean, they're burnt out. You got to figure it out. Like this last season, we called it was Fun Fridays, Fun Fridays. And we would even do it leading up to the playoffs. But one Friday we didn't even practice. We came in, ended up playing indoor volleyball, coaches versus players. Still got them on the court, still got them moving, and they had a blast.
Oh yeah, they love
Like,
that stuff.
you know,
Yeah.
you got to be able to incorporate those things, because if it's just business every day, day in and day out, it's a long season. I mean, so that I forgot about that part. We definitely incorporate a lot more of that down the stretch too, because they need it. And it can be something that literally takes, obviously the indoor playing volleyball with them was, an hour thing, but it can be something as small as if you want to do something for 5 minutes in the beginning of practice, just to lighten the mood and then get on with your business. We've done that too. I mean, you know,
Yeah. I yeah, I remember even a couple of years ago, I got a hold of somehow I got a hold of like potato sacks. We just did like potato sack races and stuff like that, just something that was fun for them to compete with. I've done like kickball before for a little bit or something like that. Keep them moving, keep them competing. Because like you said, it could be very stressful for them, and to have like a way that they can kind of let off a little bit of that stress and not be like all like basketball on. I think like to what we talked about earlier, it gives them something to do where they're still competing, they're having fun, but then I also think it like mentally can get them sort of back on track afterwards, because like they could be grounded into the dust by
yeah.
always basketball, always on, and it's like a pressure cooker, right? So to have that release of doing something else, like, whew, okay, now when it's ready to go back to basketball, they've had a little bit of an outlet elsewhere.
Well, that's the same reason why I mean, is a total tangent, but same reason why I'm not big on, I never talk about really winning, and we don't talk about how big certain games are. I mean, these kids know what that is. Like, they know if it's a big game or not. They know wins and losses. We don't need to keep drilling that in. I mean, I rarely, if ever, talk about our wins and how important winning is. And the same thing with that, because to your point, it just adds stuff that they already have on their plate. But like you mentioned, that's why we do a lot of those things too, because it lightens the mood, keeps them relaxed, refreshed, and then, you can still get something done. But
That's kind of a funny point. It's like, if I gotta talk to you about winning, uh-oh, if I gotta be the one to bring it up, like, it's
right,
kind of an understood thing, right?
exactly. Like, you don't have to. Like, they want to
Uh,
compete.
So let me ask you about when you're writing down a practice plan. Talk about like the what does the structure of it look like? All the practices are different, but if I kind of zoom in now from chunking it from the trimester to kind of what maybe a typical like a daily type practice plan would sort of look like. Depending on obviously the situation, the team, where it is you're at in the season, but kind of talk us through like maybe what one of those practice plans on a day might look like.
Yeah, so I mean, first, I guess behind the scenes, the first part is we come up with our why and our emphasis before we write the practice. So
Hmm.
we as a staff literally come up with, this is our offensive emphasis for today. This is our defensive emphasis for today. And you'll find that helps you create a practice plan so much better. You're not just going line by line. Okay, what drill should we do now? You already know what you're trying to emphasize today. So you can base the drill work and you can base what you're about to do in practice based off of what you just figured out was your emphasis. And like you said, it changes throughout the season because, again, if we're prepping for somebody, obviously the emphasis is going to be something that we need to prep for that team. But anyway, that's kind of like the background piece of creating that practice plan. And then once we do that, like I said, we'll come in, we're big on, band work and injury prevention and just keeping our bodies loose. So we always start with that. Usually we start with that before our quote practice time starts. We'll do that on the side or get stuff going. So, we like to do that. Usually that's between 5 and 8 minutes. And then we do light shooting usually. Again, I feel like, certain, and I did this too, but you feel like when you get started, it's like, all right, let's go. First drill's up and down. We're going, like first minute, and they just finished dynamic stretching. So we're big on, you got to ease into that. Like, we want to compete, of course, but ease into it. So usually we'll go light shooting, then we'll go competitive shooting. And that can be up and down. Sometimes it's half court. We do all game like, so it's all movements that, especially if it's mid-season, it's all movements within our offense, zone or man. And then usually that's about 10 minutes. And then after that, usually we'll go into, depending on the day and what we're prepping for, we'll go post guard split. And then I usually work with the post, and then I've been blessed with some great assistant coaches that are really good guards. And they'll
That's
work
nice.
with the guards. But again, everything we do in that segment is about to tie into the next segment. So like, I'm going to be working on, maybe high-low action with the posts, maybe out of a horn set or maybe out of something else. But either way, we're working on that entry pass. We're working on how to seal properly and bury somebody. And then the guards are now coming off that screen, making that reverse swing pass and that. Then after that, we'll go into what we talked about earlier, small-sided competition. We'll start with 3-on-3. Usually we'll move that to 4-on-4. And then depending on the point of the season, so if we've already passed our initial part, we'll then add our transition to it. So we love secondary offense that we have. So we will now add what we just did with post guard split, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, now into our secondary into whatever we just did. So if it's high-low or whatever.
Mhm.
And then that's a great flow into the practice. It gets them up and down. It gets them working on really small details that we are trying to emphasize for the day, as I mentioned with the emphasis. And then, after that, we'll break it down and talking about the defensive side of things if we were working on offense. But a lot of times it's that same kind of flow. Again, if we're scouting for somebody, we'll go into the scouting report and work on those things. But again, want those segments to be longer than 10, 12 minutes, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Little
Uh,
chunks, right? And then yeah.
exactly. Little chunks and, just trying to hit the important pieces. And that's honestly the same way our scouting report looks. We don't give them a book. It's it's the bullet points. I mean, and it's still very detailed, but it's short. Like, I feel like if you give them a book, when they get past the first initial thing, they just forgot everything else.
It's just what's
What
gone. Yeah,
what
yeah,
do you
yeah.
want them to know? Like, what do you want them to know? Are we running this player off the line? Are we able to go under here? Are we, what are we doing? And not if you can hit those things, as I mentioned, like concept wise during the week, that's something we also add into those practices where it's like, hey, we'll start a 2-on-2 drill and it's all about how to defend the ball screen. And we won't even tell them it's for so and so on this team. We're just, hey, today we're going over and we're jamming it. So that's what we're working on in this, and we'll
Yeah.
hit too. But it
I,
always
I
has a
think
purpose though.
I think something that you've kind of touched on a few times, which is super important, and it's a skill that I'm always developing. I certainly feel I'm better at it from when I first started coaching, but really working on your communication as a coach and the way that you quickly get out important information without over explaining things, but then, and also to what you mentioned, making sure that you're not flooding your players with way more than they need. I think that that's a skill that it's as a coach, you're always kind of working on. I know even I still am, where I want to make sure that like I can get out the clearest, most direct message I can without saying more than I need to and without over explaining myself. And I think that the more we work on that skill, the more we train on that skill as coaches, I think even that has a huge effect on the way our practices can go.
No, and you're 100% right. And that's something that, to your point, it's a learned thing, but it's not this or that. It's finding ways to keep communicating in different ways. So
Hmm.
this is something you really want so and so to hear, but you're not trying to waste time. Guess what? They're probably going to be off at some point as a sub. Use that time to do it. Or if it's a shooting drill and you have a second, pull her aside and then hit that
Yeah.
point. It doesn't, like every point you need to hit doesn't need to be a full team conversation. Like you can literally hit somebody one-on-one really quick. Or what because again, I've been blessed with great assistants. I'll tell one of them, hey, I noticed this with so and so. Next time you get them, can you just remind them, like, hey, this is how we got to do that? And it's done. It takes about 10 seconds. And then the player says, got it, coach, and fix it.
Yeah.
Instead, some people, like you said, will literally turn that into a full team. Hey, I gotta discuss this with you guys, and then you just wasted 2 minutes of your practice. And 2 minutes may not sound like a lot, but as we talked about,
You start adding those up.
yeah, it goes
Yeah.
quick. If you do
Oh yeah.
that 6 times, there's 12 minutes now that you don't have in your practice.
Yep. Yeah. And you know, for me as a coach, it's like the part of that skill as you kind of mentioned, and because I completely agree, is like I got to say something, they can hear it or see it. I can say it really quick, and then I just got to let it go and just kind of move on and just keep going from there. And then, like you said, have that conversation if you're able to like pull them aside, when they step off in the sideline or something. But that idea of like stopping everything,
Yeah.
stopping everyone, and like it's crazy to me too, and I'm sure you've seen it before, is like because I can picture some of the girls that in the previous years that I've coached where I will stop to say something and oh man, I could just see the body language. They're just like, okay, like he stopped us again. And it's like everything came to a screeching halt. And after that happens, it's hard to pick it back up again. It's hard once they feel like, all right, coach is talking again, shut down, and then it's like, all right, let's try and see if we can pick it back up, knowing that all right, he's just going to stop us again in a little bit. It can get really rough some of those practices when your players are dreading when everything stops and
Right.
then like restart, stop again, sort of thing.
Yeah, and you don't want that. And again, even on a different point of that,
Mhm.
if you're trying to prep for games, when in games is that realistic? I mean, when are you going to stop play to
Stop
communicate?
everything. Yeah.
Guess what? If you're really trying to be realistic for game prep, it's going to be those quick 10-second conversations. That's what you get in games, minus some timeouts that you might have. But you're going to get that quick, hey, I'm bringing you out for a blow, but hey, I need you to fix this. This is what you did on the last possession. I need you to fix it. Done. When they go back in, hopefully they fix it, of course, but you're not having these full on team meetings in the middle of a game. So, I mean, that's another argument you can make
Hmm.
where it's like if you're really trying to be realistic, um, talking about, practice versus a game, that's not realistic, having 3-minute conversation.
Stop. Everyone stop. Everyone stops. Yeah, yeah. On both teams, nobody move. I got to say this real quick and then we can start again, sort of thing.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. I wanted to ask about how you kind of balance the idea of making sure that you're working on your team concepts and individual concepts. You mentioned it when you talked about your daily practice schedule, but are there times when that would get altered when you feel like, okay, we gotta, focus more on more of these team concepts, or hey, we need to get some individual work in? What kind of goes through your process of making sure that not only are you getting better as a team, but also your individual players are getting kind of the work in that they need to be getting better as well?
No, and that's a great question. To start with it, I mean, one thing we do, I mentioned the statting piece, but what we also do, and I can't even take credit, somebody at the university helped me create this, and I shared this at the convention a couple years ago. Happy to share it with whoever wants it on your show too, but
Mhm.
we have a practice plan template that we created that it will help me keep track of how many minutes we've done in every category throughout the season. So like rebounding drills, defensive breakdown, whatever, and you can make it whatever you want. But throughout the year, you can literally go to the pie chart that we have, and it will say, this is how many minutes you've worked on this category. And sometimes that's a huge red flag for us. We're like, oh, no wonder why we're not taking care of the ball and our turnover count's high. Look at our production and practice. We haven't done this. Or, no wonder we're giving up so many second shots and O boards all the time. Look at our production on rebounding in our practices. We haven't done it. So again, that's
Wow.
something we do personally, and it's so helpful because you can go back at any point of the season and look at it and see, like, it all makes sense. Because again, the stats don't lie. I mean, the stats don't lie. If you're doing poorly in a specific category, there's going to be an outlying thing that shows, oh, no wonder we haven't even put in a ton of emphasis on it. But anyway, that's just a back to that. But the individual piece is twofold, and I know you wanted to talk about this too, but a lot of it starts with our meetings with our players. So we do a lot of one-on-ones, and by one-on-ones, I mean me and my assistants, and then the one player individual meetings. And we talk a lot about strengths, weaknesses, what they're looking for out of the season, depending on what time. We do always mandated as one preseason, one midseason, one postseason, and then usually, well, obviously, we talk to them a lot in the middle of those two. But those are the three that we are. I hate to use the word formal because they're not formal, but those are the three that we always make sure we hit. Anyway, so along with that, all of their individual workouts are set based off of those things. And then obviously what we see throughout the season too. But we try and do, and again, to try and help with burnout and their bodies being done by the end of the season, we usually carve out specific times for those workouts. So again, I know this is going to be specific to certain schools that may not have this luxury, but we always had 3-hour blocks, and we know obviously we're not going to practice for 3 hours. So we would use certain days. Hey, this is your individual day, and usually they'd get 2 to 3 a week because again, in that amount of time frame, you can get a lot done, especially with a decent sized staff, so that's how we would incorporate that, because we didn't want to, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to use this word in a bad way, but we didn't want to waste time with that in our 2-hour slot.
I get it. Yeah, I understand.
So we took advantage of that big time. And, a lot of times, and this is all part of our, I guess, our why, but we would group players in specific groups each week. So one week I might say, you know what, I want a one-on-one with you on Tuesday, Thursday, and just one. Like, we're working on this on Tuesday and we're working on this on Thursday. Some days it's I'll pick 4. You 4, I got you Monday, Wednesday, and we're gonna hit these, we're gonna emphasize these categories and hit those in the individual goals. Because some goals are gonna be similar, for players, especially if it's position minded, if it's guards,
Right.
or wings. But that's kind of how we do it. But it's all based off of, the long-term goals that we have for them and that they have for themselves. And sometimes it's not even on the court. We'll just watch video, especially if it's a week where they're just, they're hurt and their bodies are tired. You know what? We're not going to do the individual or small group work. Let's watch some video. because you'll get just about the same amount of production out of watching video as you will being on the court, especially if their body's tired.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
if it's towards the end of the season and they're hurting, you'll probably get a lot more out of a video session than you will trying to force an on-court workout.
Yeah. And
Some
they learn a lot from those too. I think
they
they learn a
do.
lot. Seeing is believing. I would love to think all my players trust me what I tell them that they're doing. But I
Yep.
think for them seeing things, it's like, oh wow, looks that's
Sometimes,
yeah.
and sometimes it's even, and this sounds funny, but sometimes that can even fix a shot. Like some people will feel like, man, I'm in a shooting slump. I gotta go. I gotta just go and shoot a ton of shots
Shoot
tomorrow.
your way out of it. Yeah.
And sometimes that works. But guess what? Sometimes it also works to break down some clips and show them, hey, you weren't set here. You were off balance here. You didn't follow through here. Or, look at your eye line. You're not even focused on the rim here. Your body's, you can easily do that watching film and not try and get them even more frustrated going to shoot 500 shots and shooting at 30%. And they're more frustrated than they were when they got in the gym. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it, yeah, just got to
Yeah.
pick and choose what makes the most sense.
I had a girl kind of similar to that point who she thought that she was like hustling or running really hard in transition and this, that, or another. And then she saw herself on film and she's like, oh my gosh, like I'm barely moving at all. And I was like, yeah, for her just to see it though, she's like, oh
Right.
man, is that what I look like when I'm out there? I was like, yeah, that's you.
Yep.
And then she sort of like snapped in her head, like, oh, okay, I get what you mean. Like I'm definitely not moving as much now that I've seen it, sort of thing. So sometimes it's all it takes. They see it and it's like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Well, and that's why we try and film every practice too. I know we haven't
Yeah,
talked about
that's
that
bored.
yet,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Go ahead.
yeah, we try and do that every practice. Just for you just said it, just for those reasons. I mean, it's nice to be able to look back at those things if you need to, especially in some of those individual meetings. Watching game tape is great too, but practice film is where we really spend all of our time. So that's something we like to add to our way of the program and running our practices. It just helps. It helps us coaches too, because you can watch a drill like half the time that's what I'm watching. Sometimes I'm looking at what players are doing, but the other part is really watching, okay, is this drill giving us the production that we need?
Mhm.
Is this relevant to what we're even trying to accomplish? It's a good way for you as a coach to really look inward and figure out, is this number one relevant, and is this really getting us to where we need to be? If not, like I
Right.
mentioned earlier, throw out the drill. Like it doesn't need to
Yeah.
be there. And that's a quote. I love that quote, but just because it's always been done this way doesn't mean that it's the right way.
Right,
Like,
right. Yeah, yeah.
you
I've
know,
heard that.
and a lot of coaches feel like, and that was me. And again, don't get me wrong, I had great coaches, but some of those things we did is just not relevant now.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I would be not doing wouldn't be doing my team the service that it would deserve if I use some of those drills that aren't relevant for us to be successful. So I mean,
Yeah. 100%.
yeah,
To your point too, with that kind of something that we talked about earlier, I think as a coach, you can really see also when you film your practice how your time is being spent. It gets you
yes.
an idea of like how long
You
does it take for
know,
us to transition between things? How long are we spending on things? Like how are we using our time? And it's a really good way to kind of see where your time's being spent. And for me, when I've filmed practices, it's been really great for me to tighten things up when I realize that like transitioning from one thing to another is like taking too long or we're not seamlessly flowing from one thing to another. It's really eye-opening, at least it was to me, how much time I felt like wasn't being used properly. And it wasn't the player's fault at all. It was just the way I was trying to organize or plan things just wasn't efficient. And so that's helped me a lot too on that end.
100% agree. I mean, and it's again, you could argue, and I'm sure people have said this and will continue to say this. Oh, it's just 30 seconds. Like it wasn't that bad. Again, that adds up. And I'm a huge, huge advocate of keeping yourself and your team on time and staying true to what you said you were going to do. So if you said practice is 9 to 11, you're done at 11 and you start at 9. I mean, so when you think about it, I'm not going to, just because I was maybe lazy or wasn't to your point, didn't transition from a drill quick enough, that's on me. So
Yeah.
don't hold yourself and your team late for practice by 5 minutes because you didn't transition quick enough in a drill. Does that make sense? I mean, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it just goes to being organized, and that's how our practice plans are. It's literally to the second. Like we have, and that's detailed in the plan. Like every second is accounted for. And you mentioned this earlier, that's how you do it. If you got to stop a drill because it's not working, or you got to stop a drill because we ran out of time, stop the drill then. That's fine. You can come back to it. You can always
Yeah,
come back to it. I mean,
absolutely. Coach, last question here, because this time it's been great. It's flown by, but I want to make sure I ask this last question before we hit our concluding segment. And you touched on this a little bit earlier in something we talked about, but I know as coaches, one of the things that there's always this balancing act between is working on what we need to do on a team versus being prepared for what our next opponent is going to throw at us. And I wanted to ask you maybe in a little bit more detail, have you elaborate a little bit on kind of how that balance works, where you are making sure to integrate things that you personally have your team work on, while also making sure that you're addressing maybe some of the things that are coming up with the next opponent, and kind of integrating that scouting that you're doing as well.
yeah, no, and that's a great question, and obviously one that I'm sure everybody's always looking for better techniques to do that. But to me, it's our priority is us, and
Hmm.
we really try and emphasize that in every practice. So it doesn't change a ton. And I know I said this earlier, but it really is about concepts. That's it. I mean, you can prep for a team based on concepts for the most part. Like if a team presses and you have different things, obviously, yeah, you want to go through that. But maybe let's just be specific. A team has a great post player, and we're trying to double the post from the weak side or whatever. That's specific. We will use that in our 4-man shell breakdown, and that's the concept for the week. I mean, or for that day or the next 2 days.
Hmm.
We're it's a quick hedge, or it's a stunt on the post, or maybe we're doubling it, but we'll work on all of it because maybe we'll need it for this opponent, as you mentioned, coming up. But I'm not big on really putting so much emphasis on an opponent. I feel like if we're prepared in a lot of different categories, it's not going to matter what they bring. Like we as coaches need to know, but I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's, absolutely necessary to just, okay, this is, right now we're going to spend the next 15 minutes on so-and-so's offense. I mean, I don't
Hmm.
think you need to do that. You can still do that without making it known, and like because again, I think that goes back to me. I don't, again, this is going to sound dumb, but I don't really care if we win or lose. I want to win every game, but I really
Sure.
like, I want to make sure we're playing at the highest level. And
Hmm.
to do that, we want to be close to perfect in every concept that's important to our foundation.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, that's how we run the practices. I mean, that may be a weird answer, and I'm sure who knows what the feedback is on that, but I mean, we don't spend a ton of time on that. Um, it really is based off of, I'm big on concepts, to be honest. I'm big on, if you can tackle those things and at least know how to do certain things foundationally and know how to do certain things fundamentally, it'll be easy to play against the team, because now you can just fall back on all the stuff that we've done and be able to execute it in a game against an opponent that does that certain thing. Like, because we should know how to do it anyway. But
Right. You taught it conceptually already to begin with. Yeah.
so it should be easy. I mean, it should be, like I said, if it's a team that runs a lot of ball screen continuity, or maybe it's a team that has a lot of, backdoor, a lot of motion movement, we should have already done that in shell drill. Like, jamming the back door, just different things. I don't think there's any reason why we have to
Mhm.
be so crazy as to, okay, this is what they're going to do now. They're going to do now. And don't get me wrong, when we're at like a walkthrough or a scout the day before, you know, we do a good job having all of their sets, and we know what they're going to do. So we still do that. Don't get me wrong. I don't just throw it out. Like we'll do, with the analytics where we're at today. I mean, you can literally know exactly how many times they run a certain set every game. So we'll take like those
The
top
data's
maybe
there.
four or
Yeah.
five. Those top 4 or 5, we'll have our scout team still run, and our main team will guard it. So we still do that. It's not our priority. Let me just put it that way. The
Yeah.
priority is to make sure we understand what our job is and what, quote, our identity is for this game and what we need to do.
And I think that could bring confidence to your players too, where you have enough faith in them in the sense where you communicate the message of like, hey, let's get better and let's focus on us, because if we execute what we need to do, it shouldn't matter what anyone else does.
Yeah.
Versus like the idea of like, hey, you gotta be ready for everything this team's gonna do. Because I can imagine as a player, like, wait, why are we in such like, why are we so worried about what they're doing? Why what sort of thing. Why are we playing them versus them playing us? And
Exactly.
I think they know the difference when they feel
Right.
like you're getting your team ready to play someone versus, hey, they got to be ready for us, sort of thing. It's a
Yeah.
different sort of mentality.
When it goes back to there's not, but I mean, obviously basketball is an amazing game and it's definitely developed and changed throughout the years. But one thing that hasn't changed is there's not a lot of crazy techniques that you're gonna see that you haven't practiced, you know. I mean, there's
Yeah.
gonna again, what do we see a lot right now? I mean, a lot of people, there's horns action, there's all these things. But in the reality, when you break that down, okay, do you know how to guard a high low? Do you know how to guard a flare screen? Do you know how to guard and get under or over a ball screen? All those things, if you haven't taught that in the season, you really hitting on it because this team does it, you're still not going to execute it, right?
Right.
And that's kind of the point we try and make with our team. It's like, yeah, we could try and do that, but to me, that's us failing you as coaches. Then if we're really trying to prep for this team 2 days before and we haven't hit any of these concepts, it's
It's
not
too
gonna,
late.
it's not going to work. It's not
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
work.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. So you prepare them, like you said, kind of conceptually, just about, the different things that go into being a successful offense or defense, and then be able to pull out, or emphasize more on specific things you talked about, and just lean on those things based on who it is that you're playing, but not feeling like you have to, like you mentioned, right? You shouldn't have to necessarily be teaching what these things are with two
Right.
days to go, because it's not going to get executed well, even if you know exactly what they're going to do. It's going to be a complete mess.
Well, it's
I
funny,
agree.
too, and I know we're trying to move, but it's funny. There's times where we'll put in an off, or not put in, but show a scout offense, and
Uh-huh.
it's something that's similar to some of the stuff we've been doing all year. And we'll, as a staff, we'll joke, and even our players will say it like, "Man, we run this better than the team we're about to play." And that's not a slight to them. It's just we've worked on these things in either
Yeah,
small-sided games or on
yeah,
breakdown all season. So like these movements aren't new to us. It's just this team runs this offense a little differently, but it's the same exact movements. It's the same
yeah.
stuff. I
It's
mean,
stuff that we can do. We can do
right,
this stuff ourselves, right? And because
right.
that's great too, because if your teams can run this stuff, it's like, oh, then because I know how to run this on offense, I also know on defense what I need to
How to
do
guard it.
against it, sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And it's like, boom, there's your scouting done pretty much right there.
exactly. Yeah.
Saves you a lot of time, like we talked about, being efficient. So
Yep.
that's
Yep.
great. Coach, to wrap up, there's a couple questions I ask every guest, and again, it's been crazy how quickly time's flown, but I want to make sure I ask you these couple questions, starting with, um, thinking back on your coaching career, and you have a lot of coaching experience under your belt, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to think back on your coaching career and share a moment from your coaching career that you think by sharing it, others listening would be able to learn from.
Um, I mean, this is going to be a cliche, but your career as a coach, how short or how long it is, it's a marathon, not a sprint, man. Like that's something that was very difficult to learn as a young coach because I thought every game was literally the Super Bowl. I mean, and it's true, when you're young, you want to win every game. And don't, like I said earlier, I still want to win every game, but it's not the end of the world. And like learning how to be even keel, just because you maybe don't show a ton of emotion doesn't mean you don't care. I mean, that's a big thing because I thought I had to be, and I still, I'm still passionate. I'm still definitely lively on the sideline. If you watch a game of ours, I mean, you'll be like, wait a second, but so I'm still lively, but you got to figure out how to um, be where your feet are, number one, and two, really just be able to be okay with a win and okay with a loss. Like somebody should, I thought, I don't watch the NBA at all because I think it's, lack of a better word, it's to me it's a joke. But anyway, Bradley Stevens, before he became a GM, I thought he was one of the best as far as you can't tell if his team is losing and you can't tell if his team is winning. You can't tell if his team just won, you can't tell if they lost because of his body language. And that's something I would just want to throw out there for all coaches.
Hmm.
It's okay. You're not going to be perfect. And you just have to be okay with the process because again, your career could be long. I mean, going into year 23, I don't even know how many games that is, but guess what? I definitely couldn't tell you what happened in a lot of them. And at times, the night of those games that, you may be lost, it feels like it's the end of the world, but it's just not. Like, learn from it and move on, I guess would be my biggest
Yeah.
thing I've tried to learn how to do a lot better.
Right. It's kind of like the highs can't be too high and the lows can't be too low, like sort of thing, right? Just that progress. It's hard. I know, I totally get it. Like as a coach, making sure that you kind of zoom out and kind of go from, all right, this is where we were and this is where we are versus like living and dying in each moment. I think also hopefully that also helps your players' composure, right? Your
Yeah.
players' demeanor when you're not, you know, on this emotional roller coaster yourself. You're kind of the stable force of, hey, let's just keep the process going and keep improving little by little sort of thing.
No, it's true. And that's, I mean, you ask any one of my players, that's probably the thing they hear me say the most is you can win games that you lose and you can lose games that you win. And like, if you can have that mindset, as you said, small victories, the process is more important than the outcome, all those things. If you can focus on that, to your point, your
Mhm.
players will be a lot more happier in your program. And I think you'd be surprised that they're going to be a lot more successful too. Like,
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they can focus in a lot more, and I think they play better when they don't feel like every single game is like life or death moment that their coach is putting on them. They can just focus on playing and like just go through the process of playing and and, in my experience, my players have always done better. I mean, I'm not one of those like yelling, shouting. I'm pretty emotionally
yeah,
pretty flat, not flat, but even keel myself, and my
sure.
players would say like, I'm hopefully like it's funny for them. They'll see other coaches like yelling and screaming and living and dying by everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand passion, but it's funny to see my players and they see that and they're like, "Whoa, like what is going on over there?" sort of thing. Because to
Yeah,
them, it's like completely foreign from me. So no, I like that. Yeah, keep yourself emotionally regulated for sure.
yeah.
Um, to wrap up, Coach, I give every guest what I call kind of a 60-second soapbox. I'm not going to time you, so you are welcome to go over 60 seconds, but I love to use this as a platform for you to kind of get out a final thought, a final message, a closing idea, just something you want to leave the listeners with, basketball, coaching, or otherwise. It's your soapbox, Coach, so I'm going to let you hop on it
Yeah.
figuratively, and I'm going to go ahead and give you the stage and kind of let you take it from here.
Honestly, I'll keep it short, which is rare for me. But the biggest thing I think that I would say is, you know, coaching at a ton of different levels. And I love going to practices and just watching whenever I can. And I guess to end this session with something, hopefully that makes sense, is if you had somebody, and I'm talking to all coaches at this point, if somebody came to watch your practice, what are they going to say about it? Like, I feel like we don't think about that enough. What can they see your identity in your team? Can they see your purpose in your coaching if they walked into a practice? Because I've definitely seen some where it's like, and I hate to even say this, but yeah, this person I don't think should be coaching. Like the purpose isn't there. And then there's some where, wow, like I want to take something from this practice and bring it back to mine.
Hmm.
I think that's a key question for us all to continually ask ourselves. Um, yeah, what would somebody say about our practice today? Um, because ultimately, as I said earlier, that's our classroom. And I kind of touched on this with the scouting piece, but you're not going to a lot of times be able to coach your way to win every single game. It all starts in how you prepare and how you actually practice on the time that you do get with your team. So how are those practices looking? And do you feel happy about it? Because that's your time to be their leader. And did you do a good job or not? I remember Gino, said this a long time ago in one of his speeches, but he talked about, man, I really sucked as a coach today. I really, I was terrible, and I feel bad for my players because I didn't do my job today. And that's the thing. Your job may look like it's in your games, but let's be real. You're playing, if you make postseason, you're playing 35 games, right? How many practices do you have though? Think about that. Impact that you have on the team is not in the 35 games. It's in the everyday practice that you're in. So who are you in those versus who are you in those games? And I think if you can really, look in a mirror sometimes when things aren't going right, you'll find that, hey, I can tweak this and make it better myself. It's not the players, it's me. I got to figure this out for myself. So I guess that would be my last please. Be purposeful and know what your why is when you're coaching. Because if you don't know what your why is, you probably shouldn't be in this business. Like, to be honest, it's important, and it's more beneficial for the girls and the women that you coach in that case, because they deserve your best, especially. And I'm so thrilled where this game is going. And I know my shirt says it, but yeah, I mean, women's basketball has been great for a long time. It's just taken some big names, and give them credit to get it where it's at right now, but it's been great for a long time. So if you're in it for the right reasons as a coach, just know your why and stick to your core values, and everything will work out fine.
Hey, you spoke right to my heart at the end as a lifelong girls basketball coach about supporting girls basketball. So it was near and dear to me. But no, I love that, knowing your why, and to your point, I think that idea of like the games are just the result of what those practices were, right? The games are like the evidence kind of here's how the practices are, because this is how it shows one way or another on the game itself. So no, that was a great point. Coach Rouse, I want to thank you for coming on here and having a great chat with me about practice planning, practice philosophy, and structure. I mean, there's a lot that I took down from this, a lot of notes that I took down. I know our listeners did as well, and I'm excited to kind of follow your journey and see where it goes on your new adventure here at Crean Lutheran, and see how you're able to hit the ground running with it. So, Coach, again, really appreciate you coming on and talking to us, and best of luck, and go get them next season. All right.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Enjoyed our time greatly, so I appreciate you.
And thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.